A new poll out has Bernie Sanders topping a list of potential 2020 candidates to defeat Donald Trump. Now, the results of this poll to me isn't really the story here. There is already a lot of evidence to support that Bernie Sanders would be the best person to face Donald Trump in 2020. Multiple polls showing that Bernie Sanders is the most popular politician in the country. Multiple polls showing that he could defeat Donald Trump in 2020. The actual story here is how Politico covered this poll, because it is just funny. It's funny, but it's infuriating because this shows you how mainstream press treats Bernie Sanders. So even though Bernie is at the top of the poll, this is how Politico covered it. Poll: Trump trails several Democratic prospects in 2020 matchup. And as you can tell there, that's not Bernie Sanders. That's Joe Biden. And the caption under Joe Biden reads, "Former Vice President Joe Biden leads President Donald Trump in a hypothetical 2020 matchup, 43% to 31%, according to a new Politico Morning Consult poll." So, even though Bernie Sanders tops the list in this poll, they put Joe Biden's face at the top of this story. And then they make it sound like in the caption that he leads the poll against Donald Trump. Even though, yeah, if you want to get specific, yes, Joe Biden leads Trump in the poll where he is against Trump. But if you take into account all the results, Bernie Sanders tops that list. So this is just standard when it comes to how mainstream press treats Bernie Sanders. Now let me read this paragraph as well. Against the two best-known candidates, former Vice President Joe Biden and Senator Bernie Sanders, Trump trails 12 percentage points and is mired in the low 30s. Biden leads Trump 43% to 31%, and Sanders' lead over the president is virtually the same, 44% to 32%. Oh yes, virtually the same. But would you be saying that if it was Biden on top and Bernie in second? I don't think so. Now, this is what mainstream press does to Bernie Sanders. Anytime there is some advantage that he has, or he has a policy like Medicare for All that even a Koch brothers study shows saves $2 trillion over 10 years, the CNNs, the Washington Post, the Politicos have to come out and be like, no, actually, if you ask the writer of the study, if you ask the author of the study who was paid by the Koch brothers, well, he'll tell you that it doesn't actually save money. Even though when you look at the numbers and don't talk to somebody who was paid off by the Koch brothers, you would see that, yes, it does save $2 trillion over 10 years. But that's a whole other discussion I don't want to get into here. But this is the whole thing with progressive policy, how mainstream press treats progressive policy. It's always some outlier. It's always, oh, well, sure, Bernie's leading here, but is that really going to matter when it comes November? It's all bullshit. They have no actual arguments. They have to use this smoke and mirrors mentality to try and push down any positive press that Bernie Sanders has. Now, let me break down the full results here. So you got Bernie up top, Joe Biden second, Elizabeth Warren in third, which I don't think is surprising. And then we got Cory Booker, Andrew Cuomo, which I have to say I don't really get that one. Kamala Harris, Eric Holder, Kirsten Gillibrand, Michael Avenatti. Okay, now there is something worth mentioning about this poll, and it reflects how most polls are conducted. They only polled registered voters. Now, when it comes to someone like Bernie Sanders, the kind of people that he brings out are independents and people that aren't necessarily into politics, but will come out to vote for a Bernie Sanders. So a poll like this grossly underestimates the amount of pull that Bernie Sanders has with non-voters. And that's the issue. That was, I think, the main issue with Donald Trump in 2016. All the polling was done on existing voters. And on existing voters, it seemed like Trump didn't have much of a chance, even though there was still a slim margin, but didn't have much of a chance. But if you factor in all the people that came out to the polls that don't normally vote and came out to vote for Trump, then you would realize that actually here's a candidate that can pull in a lot of votes, but not people that we necessarily pull because they aren't registered voters. So this is a clear blind spot that a lot of polls have. And another aspect of this poll is that they 44% of the people they polled were boomers, which they list as 54 to 72. So almost half the poll was done on older people. Now again, that is typically who registered voters are. But again, when we're talking about somebody like Bernie Sanders or a candidate like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who is young and appeals to people, appeals to younger people, has a bold progressive message that gets people out to vote, polling like this doesn't reflect that. So again, there are flaws in these polls, and even with these flaws, Bernie Sanders still comes out on top. But despite that, in political world, no, Joe Biden. Oh, it's all about Joe Biden. Joe Biden, if he was actually a staple on TV, like currently, and hasn't gone away since 2016, I don't think he'd be polling so high. People often forget what Joe Biden was like, much like Hillary Clinton. Hillary Clinton was polling well until she came back into the spotlight in 2015. And her support continued to dwindle while Bernie's grew. And that's because people have selective memory. They have moments where they're like, oh yeah, good old Joe Biden. But then when he's out there and he's, making gaffes, saying dumb shit, or you realize that, oh yeah, he's been in the pockets of banks his entire career, then you begin to recognize that, yeah, maybe Joe Biden isn't the guy for me. But when you have somebody who isn't on television on a regular basis, people forget that. And they just have this very romanticized version of Joe Biden that isn't a realistic version that people will see once again if he does run in 2020. So, I don't know. I'm just here to show you that these polls, while they do support Bernie, they aren't necessarily realistic in who they actually poll and what real world effect non-voters would have on the system.